Hello and welcome to News 24. We're talking about the breaking news story of the day. President Jacob Zuma announcing that government will subsidize free higher education for poor students and working class students. Of course, happening as the ANC holds its National Elective Conference here at the Nasrec Center. To get details of this, I'm joined by Editor-in-Chief of News 24, Adrian Basson, and our resident analyst, Mpumelelo Mkabela. Adrian, just give us details. What exactly is President Jacob Zuma saying, given that we had the Hare Commission saying government can't give free education to poor students?
Well, Mkhlasi, how interesting is this timing? I mean, this is classical Zuma. You know, we were not expecting this at all. We are all focusing on the ANC race, and we know that President Zuma wants his former wife, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, to succeed him as ANC president. And then this morning at 8 o'clock, we literally woke up with the news that President Zuma has approved free higher education. This is a very strategic move. He has announced that government will now fund all higher education at technical colleges as well as public universities for poor and working class families with an annual income of 350,000 rand per annum or less. That is a massive burden on the budget. He's also announced that the amount of money spent on higher education will now move to 1% of GDP, which means serious cuts will have to be made in other places. I don't know what this means. I think there's something to be read in the fact that he did it this morning. It might be a sign of desperation on behalf of the Zuma camp that needs something to get this campaign back on track, or it might be something to do with his legacy. We know that Zuma has been talking about his legacy for the past day or two, saying that he hasn't made mistakes and he wants to leave something behind. And we always knew that free higher education was his thing. Obviously not blanket free higher education for everyone. People who earn more than 600,000 rand per year will still have to pay. But yeah, it's a big announcement.
Mpumi, should we read anything in terms of when the announcement was actually made? I mean, this is an ANC conference. It's supposed to be his last addressing this conference.
Well, yes, there's a political significance to the whole thing, in a sense that the last time the policy conference sat here at Nasrec, the Hare Commission report had not been released. So for the first time that a conference of the ANC sits and the Hare Commission report is now available, where they could have perhaps debated it and maybe have a resolution on how to do it, Jacob Zuma decides that he's going to announce, because he's head of government and he's in charge of the executive, so he can announce that. So the ANC conference here doesn't have anything to discuss anymore. Because what if they had a different view? They would come with a different view on how this thing could be done. He's already preempted that.
Interestingly, what if the new president of the ANC has a different way of actually implementing this?
Exactly, because you could emerge here with somebody who thinks differently on how to deal with higher education. And that person would obviously have a big influence in terms of what's the content of January 8 statement, which then informs the State of the Nation address in February, which then informs the budget. And Zuma now has preempted all these processes by wanting to claim glory.
And of course, he will say, this is what I introduced. But the big thing is, where will the money come from? We have a government in debt.
That's a big question, Mkhlasi. We don't know at this stage how much extra burden this means for the fiscus. What we do know is that in the past budget, government spent around 230, 240 billion rand on higher education. And that was at, according to President Zuma and Judge Hare, that's about 0.68% of GDP. It's very difficult to make that calculations as quickly, because you actually have to look at the budget. But that's going up to 1% now. So it's just a bit below of almost doubling the amount being spent. So, this is going to place an enormous burden on the fiscus. With the resignation of the head of budget, Michael Sachs, a while ago, I heard from very good sources that it was exactly because of this reason, that he just couldn't find the money for Zuma to fund free higher education. And the big question is South Africans must ask, because let's be honest, for a lot of people this is great news. For a lot of people having access to higher education who couldn't afford it, this is fantastic news. But this comes as a price. Where are you going to get that money from? You're going to have to take it from something like police, education, health. Which department doesn't deserve their budget? That's going to add another layer of complexity with the new incoming ANC president.
And of course, pressure on the finance minister, Malusi Gigaba, because the announcement has been made. He has to say, here is the money.
Yes, I mean, the worst thing is that this is not just a short-term thing. It's got impact on public finances over the long term, especially because he's scrapping the loan system. Because at the moment, you have a hybrid system. Some students qualify for full grant. Some students qualify for a combination of loan and grant. So he's now scrapping the loan system. So some students would never have to pay back anything, regardless of what kind of job they get after graduating. Some of them might get nice jobs than others. So, but they still don't have to pay afterwards.
Or if you fail.
Or if you fail, you know, the government forfeits that money. So it's fruitless expenditure, if you like. So there's something wrong with this proposal. It's much more populist than realistic, in my opinion.
That's the big difference, sorry Makhlati, but that's a big difference from what Judge Hare's commission actually recommended. Because you'll remember that Judge Hare said, let's introduce a loan scheme where the banks, we actually make a deal with the banks that they grant these loans to students. The students don't pay, but you have to graduate and you have to start paying back when you start earning a salary, which was kind of a nice incentive almost for people. That's now been scrapped. It's a grant, you get the money, doesn't matter.
Is it also important to look at the time he's doing it? Because already chancellors of universities or vice chancellors were quite concerned that we don't know where to put the increase for the next year, given that we don't know when or how government will go forward on this matter.
Well, universities have always been underfunded, and they've always complained about this. That in the last financial year, they were not allowed, for example, to raise the fees. The government had to supplement those fees, but government supplemented those fees by cutting certain expenditures that were meant for the universities themselves, like research and development, like, for example, a program that's meant to encourage transformation in academia by having more black lecturers. So that project was whittled down and cut down so that more money could be available to supplement the failure of the fact that universities were not allowed to increase the fees. So you're now going to have another problem where cuts will be implemented across the board to actually finance this free higher education that Zuma has announced. So it's actually, I don't think public finances will be in order after this, because someone has to be sacrificed somewhere.
Do you think this will be enough for the students who started the free fees must fall campaign? I mean, they wanted a blanket fees must fall for everybody.
Yeah, I think look, this is obviously not blanket fees must fall, but I think any sensible South African would say there's absolutely no point in having people not paying who can pay. People who can pay for the education must pay. And this is a victory for fees must fall, but I think the timing is cynical. I'm sorry, but this for me, this morning after it seems like the momentum is shifting the way of Cyril Ramaphosa to win this race, I just read something here. It smacks of desperation. It smacks of some kind of victory that Zuma wants to claim. Will this convert into more votes for Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma? I'm not so sure.
Of course, the Youth League has been pushing for the fees to fall, and they are with Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. But Mpumi, you have said that there's nothing good to say of Zuma's legacy. Is this his saving grace?
Well, even this is a problem, because it's not realistic in terms of the public finances at the moment. So what credit rating agencies are looking at is fiscal stabilization or fiscal consolidation, as they said. And they said that they're going to hold government to its own undertaking. But clearly, if you're going to have free higher education, you are already veering off the fiscal consolidation. In fact, you are going through fiscal expansion. So you expect the budget deficit to be actually higher. And at the time when the economy is not growing, Tom Moyane is not able to collect enough taxes because of lower tax morality, but also because the economy is not growing fast enough. Even the sectors that are said to have grown in the last quarter, which is agriculture and mining, those are sectors that are not creating jobs. In the last few months, thousands of jobs were lost in the mining sector, a sector that is really not gaining much confidence with the current Gupta-captured minister, which is Moseven's Zwane. So you have all of this combination of factors, quite frankly, where even if Zuma can say that he's trying to, you know, make amends with his legacy and all of that, to an ordinary man in the street, he might look like he's doing very well, and Zuma likes to appeal to those people. But for those of us who are in the know, who know how the public finances work, we know that Zuma is actually wrecking those people. It's actually damaging the futures of those very same people that he's trying to appeal to.
Anything to add as we wrap up?
No, I think exactly a good point. I mean, what we've been hearing for many years from experts who know much more about this than I do is that the funding need is actually at basic education, at the schools, specifically at the early development age of kids. Money might be taken away from there now to fund higher education, which is ultimately an elite access.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. That was the editor of News 24, Adrian Basson, and our resident analyst, Mpumelelo Mkabela, talking about President Jacob Zuma's announcement this morning that government will be providing free education for poor and working class students.